In the gleaming 62nd floor office of Harrington Hospitality, overlooking the concrete arteries of Manhattan, Daniel Harrington stood behind his mahogany desk and delivered words that would shatter everything. "You're fired." The man across from him didn't beg. He didn't rage. Instead, Ryan Mitchell looked up with tired eyes and said something that cracked the armor Daniel had spent 33 years building. But before we understand why that moment changed everything, you need to know who Daniel Harrington really was. The illegitimate son of hospitality mogul Richard Harrington. Daniel had been raised on tests. When he was 16, Richard cut off his credit cards without warning and told him to survive alone for a month. No help, no safety net. Daniel worked 3 months, slept in hostels, ate ramen until his stomach burned. When the month ended, Richard took him to dinner and said he'd passed. That was the closest the old man ever came to saying he was proud. Daniel learned that sentiment was weakness. Trust was a liability. Love was a luxury he couldn't afford, especially love between men. He discovered that truth the hard way in college when Richard found out about his roommate Marcus. The man he'd planned to build a life with was suddenly transferred to Stanford. The scholarship that made it possible appeared overnight. Richard never said a word, but Daniel understood. Some doors stayed locked forever. Now, as CEO of Harrington Hospitality for 5 years, Daniel applied the same philosophy his father had taught him. The company's year-end evaluations were approaching, and instead of relying on standard performance reviews, Daniel decided to create his own test. He would call employees into his office one by one and tell them they were fired. Their reactions would reveal everything about their character. Who begged, who raged, who crumbled over 2 weeks. He tested 12 employees from various departments across their Manhattan properties. A line cook from the kitchen at Madison Square Garden, a housekeeper from the plaza, a bartender from their Tribeca location. Each one entered his office expecting routine feedback. Each one heard the words, "You're fired," and reacted predictably. Some begged for second chances. Others got angry, accusing him of unfairness. A few cried. None of them surprised him, until Ryan Mitchell walked through his door on that gray Wednesday afternoon. Ryan was different from the moment he knocked. Most employees approached Daniel's office like they were walking toward a guillotine. Ryan just looked calm. He was taller than Daniel had expected, with dark hair that needed cutting and green eyes that carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. He wore his server uniform from their restaurant on 52nd and Broadway, black slacks and a white button-down that had seen better days. Daniel gestured to the chair across from his massive desk. Ryan sat without fidgeting. Daniel didn't waste time with pleasantries. He delivered the line he'd said 11 times before. "You're fired." Ryan didn't move him. He didn't speak. He just looked at Daniel with an expression that shifted from surprise to something Daniel couldn't name. Not panic, not anger, something deeper. Resignation, maybe, or grief. Finally, Ryan spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "Thank you for the opportunity to work here, Mr. Harrington." Daniel frowned. That wasn't the reaction he'd expected. But Ryan wasn't finished. He looked down at his hands, then back up at Daniel. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost pleading. "But if I really am losing my job today, I need to ask you something. Please don't tell my daughter. Let her believe I'm still trying my best." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, and this man had just found a crack he didn't know existed. He stared at Ryan, and Ryan stared back. The city hummed 62 floors below. The clock on his desk marked seconds that felt like hours. Then Daniel did something he had never done before in any of these tests. He broke protocol. It was a test. "Mr. Mitchell, you're not actually fired." Ryan blinked, his face going blank with confusion. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying him. "I wanted to see how people react under pressure. Most beg, some rage. You thought only of your daughter." Ryan's jaw tightened. There was something in his eyes Daniel couldn't read. Not relief, not gratitude. Something harder. "That's cruel," he said quietly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "It's effective." Ryan stood without waiting to be dismissed. He nodded once and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back. His voice was level, but there was an edge to it that made Daniel's chest tighten. "I hope you found what you were looking for, Mr. Harrington." The door closed with a soft click that echoed in the sudden silence. Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at the space where Ryan had been. He'd expected gratitude when he revealed the truth. He'd expected relief. Instead, Ryan had looked at him like he was something cold and broken. It was the most dignity Daniel had ever witnessed in another human being. And for the first time in years, he wondered if his father had been wrong about everything. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do isn't surviving alone, but admitting we need someone else to survive for. Hard Stories brings you real stories about love, identity, and the courage to choose vulnerability over safety. Subscribe for more authentic tales that remind us what it truly means to be human. That night, Daniel stayed late in his Central Park West penthouse, but sleep wouldn't come. He pulled Ryan's employee file and read every detail. Ryan Mitchell, 28 years old, hired 2 years ago as a server at their Broadway location. Never missed a shift except when his daughter was sick. Always requested early schedules so he could pick her up from school. Made minimum wage plus tips. No complaints from management, no disciplinary actions. Just steady, quiet work. There was a note in his file from Human Resources that made Daniel's chest tighten. His wife Sarah had died in a car accident on the FDR Drive. She'd been a freelance artist, driving home from a gallery opening in Soho when a drunk driver ran a red light. Ryan was raising their 6-year-old daughter Emma alone. Daniel closed the file and stared out at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. He thought about his father's tests, about the lessons in strength and independence. But looking at Ryan's file, he wondered if Richard had been wrong. Maybe strength wasn't about surviving alone. Maybe it was about surviving for someone else. The next morning, Daniel did something he'd never done before. He accessed the security system at their restaurant and reviewed footage from the last 6 months. Not because he suspected Ryan of anything, but because something about the man's quiet dignity haunted him. He watched Ryan arrive 15 minutes early every morning, changing into his uniform in the staff room. He watched him stay late when other servers called in sick, never complaining about the extra hours. He watched him help train new employees, showing them the computer system with patient hands. Most telling of all, Daniel watched Ryan leave exactly 30 minutes before his shift ended every single day to pick up Emma from PS 44 on the Upper West Side. One of his managers had written him up for it once, citing policy violations. Daniel found the report in the system and deleted it. Then he sent a memo to all department heads. Employees with children were allowed flexible schedules, no exceptions. He didn't tell anyone why he'd made the change. 3 weeks after the test, Daniel broke another one of his rules. He went down to the restaurant during the dinner rush. The Harrington Grill occupied the ground floor of their flagship hotel on Broadway. All exposed brick and Edison bulbs designed to feel both elegant and approachable. He usually avoided the dining room, preferring to stay in his office where he could observe through reports and spreadsheets. But tonight he wanted to see Ryan in his element. He found him behind the bar, mixing drinks for a couple celebrating their anniversary. Ryan's movements were economical, practiced. When he smiled at their story about how they'd met, the expression reached his eyes in a way that made Daniel's throat tighten. A server named Jessica dropped a tray of glasses near the kitchen door, and Ryan didn't even flinch. He just grabbed a broom and helped clean up the mess, making sure she was okay before returning to his customers. Daniel watched from the doorway, hidden in the shadows between the host station and the wine display. He saw the way Ryan moved through the controlled chaos of dinner service. Never rushed, even when the restaurant was packed. Never short with difficult customers. Never making anyone feel like they were bothering him. There was a grace to it that Daniel envied, a kind of natural leadership that had nothing to do with titles or corner offices. When Jessica made another mistake, confusing orders at table 12, Ryan quietly stepped in. He spoke to her in a voice too low for Daniel to hear, but whatever he said made her shoulders relax. Then Ryan handled the table himself, turning what could have been a disaster into a moment of genuine hospitality. The customers left smiling, and Jessica looked like she might cry from relief. That's when Daniel realized he was witnessing something he'd never understood. True strength wasn't about testing people until they broke. It was about lifting them up when they stumbled. Ryan possessed something Daniel had spent his entire life thinking was weakness. Kindness without agenda. Generosity without expecting anything in return. The ability to see someone struggling and help without making them feel small. He left the restaurant before Ryan could notice him, but the image followed him back to his penthouse. That night, lying in his bed overlooking Central Park, Daniel thought about Marcus. His college roommate had been the only person who'd ever looked at him the way Ryan looked at his daughter. With complete, unconditional acceptance, Daniel had been ready to build a life with Marcus, to face whatever challenges came with being two men in love. But Richard's intervention had taught him that love made you vulnerable, that caring about someone gave others power over you. Now, about them, watching Ryan through security cameras and stolen glimpses, Daniel wondered if his father's greatest test had been his greatest failure. Because Ryan Mitchell, a single father working for tips in a Manhattan restaurant, displayed more authentic strength in one evening than Daniel had managed in 33 years of carefully constructed walls. The man who'd been tested had turned out to be stronger than the man doing the testing. And Daniel Harrington, CEO of a hospitality empire worth hundreds of millions, found himself envying a server's ability to sleep peacefully, knowing he was loved. Perhaps the most dangerous thing about walls is not that they keep others out, but that they keep us from discovering who we truly are when someone finally sees us. 2 weeks later, disaster arrived in the form of a phone call that would change everything. Ryan's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman from Chinatown who'd been watching Emma in the evenings, had fallen and broken her wrist. She couldn't help anymore, and Ryan had no backup. No family in the city, no support system beyond the fragile network of favors and shared responsibilities that kept single parents afloat in New York. Daniel happened to be reviewing schedules with Diane, the shift manager. When Ryan's call came through, she put it on the speaker without thinking, and Daniel listened as Ryan's voice filled the office, tight with stress. He explained the situation, apologized repeatedly, asked if he could bring Emma to work for just one night. He'd keep her in the back corner near the dishwashing station. She wouldn't bother anyone. He'd find another solution tomorrow. He promised. Diane looked at Daniel questioningly. Daniel nodded once. Diane told Ryan it was fine, one night only. When the call ended, she sighed and muttered something about how hard it must be raising a kid alone in this city. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he found himself canceling his dinner plans. He told himself it was to catch up on paperwork. But the truth was more complicated. He couldn't explain the pull he felt to be in the building that night. At 8 o'clock, when the dinner rush was in full swing, Daniel took the elevator down to the restaurant. The dining room buzzed with conversation and clinking silverware, servers weaving between tables with practiced efficiency. And there, in the corner near the kitchen, sat a little girl on an overturned plastic crate, coloring in a book with intense concentration. Emma Mitchell had dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail and wore a pink sweatshirt with grass stains on the elbows. She looked small and out of place in the industrial chaos of a working restaurant, but she seemed content, her tongue poking out slightly as she tried to stay inside the lines of her coloring book. Ryan appeared from behind the bar carrying a plate of chicken tenders and fries, setting it down beside her with the gentle care of someone for whom this gesture was more important than breathing. Daniel watched from the doorway as Ryan crouched to Emma's level, saying something that made her grin and pick up a French fry. He kissed the top of her head before hurrying back to his waiting customers. The tenderness in that simple moment hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd never seen love that pure, that unguarded. His own father had never kissed his forehead or brought him food with such obvious joy. At 9:30, Daniel was back in his office trying to focus on quarterly reports when his assistant Jennifer knocked on the door. "There's a situation downstairs," she said. Her usual composure cracked with urgency. "The little girl, she's sick." Daniel was out of his chair before he'd made a conscious decision to move. By the time he reached the restaurant kitchen, Ryan was holding Emma in his arms. her small face flushed with fever and damp with tears. She was crying softly, the kind of exhausted whimpers that come from a body fighting something it doesn't understand. Ryan was speaking to her in a low, soothing voice, telling her everything would be okay, that Daddy was here. But Daniel could see his hands trembling with barely controlled panic. A server hovered nearby, looking helpless. While the kitchen staff tried to continue working around the crisis, Daniel stepped forward before he could second-guess himself. "What happened?" he asked, his voice sharper than he'd intended. Ryan looked up, recognition flickering across his face, followed by something close to desperation. "She has a fever," Ryan said, his voice cracking on the words. "I need to get her to a hospital, but I don't have a car. I called for a cab, but it's Wednesday night in Manhattan and no one's picking up." Daniel didn't think, he just moved. "Come with me. My car is downstairs." Ryan stared at him for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then Emma whimpered again and the decision was made. Daniel led them to the private elevator that descended to the underground parking garage. His black Tesla sat in its reserved spot under the fluorescent lights, sleek and expensive and completely irrelevant in the face of a sick child. He gestured for Ryan to get in the back with Emma. The nearest hospital was New York Presbyterian, 15 minutes away through traffic that crawled like a living thing. Daniel drove with focus he usually reserved for board meetings, weaving between yellow cabs and delivery trucks, while Ryan held Emma and whispered reassurances. The little girl's head rested against her father's chest, and his hand stroked her hair with a tenderness that made Daniel's chest ache. At the hospital, Emma was admitted quickly once the triage nurse saw her fever. They said it was a viral infection, nothing serious, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Ryan sat beside her bed in the pediatric ward, holding her small hand while she slept, machines beeping softly around them. Daniel stood near the window, looking out at the city lights and feeling like an intruder in this sacred space of parental love. After what felt like hours, Ryan spoke without looking away from his daughter. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." Daniel didn't turn around. "You would have figured it out. You always do." The silence stretched between them, filled with questions neither man knew how to ask. Then Ryan said quietly, "Why did you really do that test?" Daniel could have lied. He could have cited company policy or leadership development, but something about the hospital room's soft lighting and the trust Ryan had shown by accepting his help made lying impossible. "My father used to test me," he said finally. "When I was 16, he cut me off financially and told me to survive on my own for a month. No help, no safety net. I worked at 3 jobs, slept in homeless shelters. When it was over, he told me I'd passed. He said it made me stronger." Ryan looked at him then, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "Did it?" Daniel was quiet for a long time, watching Emma sleep. "I learned how to survive," he said eventually. "I just never learned how to live." Ryan shifted in his chair, careful not to wake his daughter. "My wife Sarah used to say that strength isn't about surviving alone. It's about surviving for someone else." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge Daniel didn't know how to cross. Sometimes the most profound education happens, not in what we learn about others, but in what their courage teaches us about ourselves. They stayed at the hospital until dawn painted the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and gray. Emma woke once, groggy and confused, and Ryan soothed her back to sleep with whispered promises and gentle touches. Daniel remained by the window, watching the ebb and flow of a city that never stopped moving, feeling like he was witnessing something sacred that he'd never been part of. When the doctor cleared Emma to go home, Ryan carried her to the Tesla and Daniel drove them back to Queens, to a neighborhood of narrow streets and old apartment buildings that felt a world away from his penthouse. 3 days later, the photograph appeared. It was grainy and poorly lit, taken by someone with a long lens and questionable ethics, but it was unmistakable. Daniel Harrington, CEO of Harrington Hospitality, carrying a child into New York Presbyterian at 2 a.m. A man walked behind him, face partially obscured but visible enough to identify. The headline on the gossip website read, "Billionaire CEO's Secret Family, Mystery Man and Child Spotted in Late-Night Hospital Drama." By noon, it had spread to every major outlet. By evening, social media was dissecting every pixel of the image. Speculation exploded across platforms. Who was the child? Who was the man? Why had Daniel kept this secret? The theories ranged from secret adoption to hidden relationships to elaborate corporate scandals. Daniel issued a statement through his publicist that was both true and insufficient. "I helped a colleague's family in a medical emergency. There is no secret child or hidden relationship." But the internet had already decided what it wanted to believe. The board of directors called an emergency meeting the next morning. Daniel sat at the head of the mahogany conference table in the 48th floor boardroom, surrounded by men in expensive suits who looked at him like he'd committed a capital crime. Gerald Morrison, the CFO, spoke first with his trademark combination of corporate speak and thinly veiled threats. "This scandal is affecting our stock price and brand reputation. We need immediate damage control." Patricia Walsh, the only woman on the board and usually Daniel's strongest ally, leaned forward with obvious concern. "We've identified the man in the photograph, Ryan Mitchell, employee number 7749, server at our Broadway location. The connection creates obvious liability issues for the company." Gerald's expression hardened with something that looked like satisfaction. "The solution is straightforward. Terminate Mr. Mitchell immediately. Issue a statement that he's no longer with the company. Distance yourself completely from the situation." Daniel stared at him across the polished wood surface. His voice when he spoke was ice over steel. "No." Gerald frowned like he'd misheard. "Daniel, this isn't personal. It's business. Standard crisis management protocol." "I said no," Daniel repeated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Patricia spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of fiduciary duty. "If you don't handle this appropriately, the board has the authority to take action. We have shareholders to protect and a reputation to maintain." Daniel stood slowly, his chair rolling back on its casters. The room went silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic 48 floors below. "This meeting is over," he said simply. He walked out without looking back, leaving 12 board members staring at an empty chair and each other. That night, Daniel sat in his office staring at his phone, typing and deleting messages to Ryan. He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry" felt inadequate. "This isn't your fault" felt like a lie because it was his world that had pulled Ryan into this mess. He thought about calling, found Ryan's number in the employee directory, and hovered his thumb over the call button for 10 minutes before setting the phone down. What could he say that wouldn't make everything worse? The next morning brought an ultimatum delivered in a crisp white envelope. Fire Ryan Mitchell immediately or the board would call for a vote of no confidence. Daniel had 48 hours to decide between his position and his principles. He called Ryan and asked him to come to his office. Ryan arrived looking exhausted, his face drawn with the weight of 3 days of media attention he'd never asked for. Photographers had been camped outside his apartment building in Astoria. Emma's school had called asking questions about media protocols. His quiet life had been turned inside out by forces beyond his control or understanding. Ryan sat across from Daniel in the same chair where this had all begun weeks earlier. Daniel looked at the man who'd shown him what real strength looked like and said the words he'd been dreading. "I need you to take a leave of absence, temporarily, until this media attention dies down." The words felt like glass in his throat. Ryan stared at him, and Daniel watched something die in his eyes. "So you're letting them win," Ryan said quietly. "It's not." "Yes, it is," Ryan interrupted, standing slowly. His voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath that Daniel recognized from their first meeting. "You tested me to see who I was. Now I know who you are." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He wanted to explain about the board, about the threats, about how he was trying to protect Ryan from something worse. But the explanations stuck in his throat like cowards. Ryan looked at him with an expression that was somehow worse than anger. It was disappointment. "I thought you were different." He said, I was wrong." He walked to the door with the same quiet dignity he'd shown that first day. But before he left, he turned back one final time. You know what the worst part is? I actually started to believe you cared. The door closed with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at the space where Ryan had been, understanding finally what his father's tests had really taught him. Not strength, but fear. Not independence, but isolation. And now, when it mattered most, he'd chosen the safety of his walls over the risk of genuine connection. The greatest test of character isn't how we behave when no one is watching, but what we choose when everything we think we value is on the line. Daniel spent the next 3 days in his office without going home. He had Jennifer bring clothes and coffee, sleeping on the leather couch when exhaustion forced him to rest. The rest of the time, he sat at his desk staring at nothing, replaying Ryan's words on an endless loop. I thought you were different. I was wrong. On the fourth day, he opened Ryan's file again and read every detail of his life. Every shift worked, every request for time off to care for Emma, every extra hour volunteered when colleagues couldn't make it. Then he read the part about Sarah Mitchell, died in a car accident, left behind a husband and 6-year-old daughter. Daniel thought about Emma, the little girl sitting on a crate in the kitchen, coloring quietly while her father worked, the way she'd grinned when Ryan brought her food, the trust in her eyes when he told her everything would be okay. He thought about the hospital, about Ryan's words. My wife Sarah used to say that strength isn't about surviving alone, it's about surviving for someone else. Daniel realized that his father had been wrong about everything. Strength wasn't about enduring tests or building walls. It was about having something worth protecting. Ryan had that. He had Emma. And Daniel had taken away his dignity, his livelihood, his belief that people could choose to be good when it mattered. He looked at the board's ultimatum again. Fire Ryan or step down as CEO. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel understood what he needed to do. The next evening, Daniel left his office just after 6 and drove to Astoria. It was raining, the kind of steady November drizzle that made the city look like a watercolor painting left in the weather. He found Ryan's building and sat in his car for 10 minutes, trying to find courage he'd never needed in any boardroom or business negotiation. Finally, he got out and walked through the front door of the old apartment building. The hallway smelled like cooking oil and decades of other people's lives. He climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked on apartment 3C. Footsteps approached the door, paused, then continued. When the door opened, Ryan stood there in jeans and a gray sweater, his hair slightly damp like he'd just gotten out of the shower. When he saw Daniel, his expression went flat with recognition and wariness. "What are you doing here?" Ryan asked, not moving from the doorway. Daniel's throat felt tight. "I need to talk to you." Ryan hesitated, and Daniel thought he might close the door. Then he stepped aside and gestured for Daniel to enter. The apartment was small and warm, with a couch covered in colorful throws and Emma's artwork taped to the refrigerator. Children's books were scattered on the coffee table next to a half-finished puzzle. It felt more like a home than Daniel's penthouse ever had. Ryan gestured to the couch and remained standing, arms crossed. "Say what you came to say?" Daniel looked down at his hands, noticed they were shaking, and couldn't remember the last time that had happened. "I was wrong," he said, "about the test, about putting you on leave, about everything. I thought I was protecting the company, protecting you from something worse. But all I did was prove that when it mattered, I chose fear over doing what was right." Ryan's expression softened slightly, but his posture remained guarded. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, setting it on the coffee table. "This is a new contract. You're not just getting your job back, you're being promoted to Director of Restaurant Operations for all our Manhattan locations. The salary is 5 times what you were making, with full benefits, stock options, and control over staffing and policy. You can make the changes you think are right." Ryan looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "I don't want your guilt money." "It's not guilt," Daniel said quickly. "It's recognition. You've been doing the work of 3 people for minimum wage. You've been holding that restaurant together while everyone else took you for granted. This isn't charity. It's what you deserve. Ryan opened the envelope and scanned the contract, his eyes widening when he saw the numbers. Then he set it down and looked at Daniel directly. Why now? Why not 3 days ago when I needed you to stand up for me? Daniel felt tears threaten and blinked them back. Because I was afraid. I was afraid the board would destroy you. Afraid that if I admitted how much you meant to me, I'd lose everything. But I lost you anyway, and that was worse than anything they could have done to me. I resigned as CEO this morning. Ryan sat down heavily on the couch. You what? Daniel managed a small smile. I told them they could fire you or fire me, but they couldn't have both. Turns out they chose to keep you. I start looking for a new CEO tomorrow. Ryan stared at him. You gave up your company. For me, for Emma, for the principle that people matter more than profits or stock prices or what other people think. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the gesture settling between them. Then a bedroom door creaked open, and Emma appeared in the hallway wearing pajamas with cartoon animals, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Daddy, she said, then stopped when she saw Daniel. Her face lit up with pure joy. Mr. Daniel. She ran to him and threw her arms around his legs without hesitation. Daniel froze, unsure how to respond. He looked at Ryan, who watched with an expression he couldn't read. Slowly, carefully, Daniel put his arms around the little girl. Emma squeezed tighter. I missed you, she said. Daddy said you were busy with work, but I knew you'd come visit. Daniel felt something break open inside him. Not crack or shatter, but bloom. He held Emma and let himself cry. Not quietly or carefully, but openly. Emma pulled back and looked up at him with concern. Why are you sad? I'm not sad. Sweetheart, Daniel managed. I'm happy to see you. Emma beamed, then looked at her father. Is Mr. Daniel going to stay for dinner? Ryan's eyes met Daniel's across the small living room, and something passed between them that felt like forgiveness, like possibility, like the beginning of something neither man had dared to hope for. Yeah, baby, Ryan said softly. I think he is. 6 months later, Daniel stood on the rooftop garden of the Harrington Tower, a green space he'd had built overlooking the city. Emma was chasing butterflies between the flower beds, her laughter echoing off the glass and steel around them. Ryan stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You built a rooftop garden for my daughter, he asked with a smile. For all the employees' kids, Daniel replied, but mostly for her. They'd been together officially for 3 months, taking it slow, building trust one conversation at a time. Emma had accepted Daniel's presence in their lives with the easy grace of children who understand love better than adults. She called him her best friend and insisted he read her bedtime stories when he stayed over. The new CEO had kept all of Daniel's employee-friendly policies and added more. Daniel himself had started a nonprofit focused on supporting single-parent families, using his own money and connections to create the kind of safety net he'd never had. He was happier than he'd ever been, not because he'd found success, but because he'd finally learned what success usually meant. Maha, Emma ran up to them, holding a flower she'd picked. This is for you, she said, handing it to Daniel. He crouched down to her level and accepted it with the solemnity the gift deserved. Thank you, sweetheart. Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Ryan's hand found Daniel's shoulder, warm and steady. They stood together as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of hope. For the first time in 33 years, Daniel Harrington felt like he belonged somewhere. Not in a boardroom or a corner office, but here, with a little girl who believed he was good and a man who'd taught him that love wasn't a weakness to overcome but a strength to embrace. Have you ever had to choose between the safety of what you know and the risk of who you could become with someone who truly sees you? Sometimes the most powerful transformation happens not when we find the right person, but when we become brave enough to let them find us. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more authentic tales about love, courage, and the families we choose when we're finally ready to be chosen in return.